centralized power cannot beget the certain kinds of people, the certain kind of population that can produce and sustain a proletarian society. I think that in order to have a direct democracy or an industrialized, syndicalized society, whatever we want to call it, a liberated society, that can't be achieved by trusting the state to guide us towards that.
I agree. I'm not a Marxist-Leninist. Make it a democratic society. Have people vote, you know?
Well, vote for what?
Well, for which proletarian leader they would prefer.
See, that's still an issue though, because if you are voting for leaders, then you are still dependent upon a hierarchical social system.
Yeah, we're
In
not
order to
getting out of that.
deconstruct, well, that
Ever.
is the end goal,
No, it's
right?
not. We're never getting out of that.
So you're saying that a communal society, a liberated society, is not the end goal.
Oh, no, sure, communal, liberated, but still obviously bureaucratic and hierarchical. We can't not have
I think
bureaucracy.
those things are very, very juxtaposed to each other. They're
Uh,
very mutually
there's
exclusive.
an agitation. The dialectic continues, certainly, but yeah, I'm all for civil society. I'm all for the creation and maintenance of a bureaucracy. It's the only way to allow people to enjoy a high quality of life. You know, if you want people to get their bodies checked in MRI machines, I mean, if you want people to get their penicillin, we can't give up on this. There's just no way to manage a modern economy without a bureaucracy.
Well, how do you reconcile the belief that an industrialized, liberated society cannot exist without bureaucracy, with historical examples such as the CNT FAI that was very, very anti-bureaucratic and very decentralized and very directly democratic, but also very industrial?
Well, did they have MRI machines?
Um, I'm not familiar. What is an MRI machine?
Magnetic resonance imaging, I think. They didn't. It was being facetious. MRI machines didn't exist back then. So the Iberian Anarchist Federation. Look, I'm sympathetic to their aims here, but a militant group of anarchists are not a whole goddamn society. You know,
No,
when
of course not.
when you're part of a militia, you're willing to accept a lower standard of living, and also the anarchists benefited from the bureaucracy of the systems that they used to sustain themselves. Where did they house themselves in? Democratic, communally, no engineer certification required housing? No, of course not. Those buildings were built by engineers that were approved by the Spanish state. Where'd they get their food from? Did they go out and farm all of it? Well, some of it. But a lot of that they just got through the normal methods of food acquisition that people at the time had access to. Some stuff works well for, just completely like decentralized organization, Rojava, for example. But if you want those goddamn MRI machines, you need a massive system of trade and certification and technocratic expertise, don't you?
You do, and I think that all of that can be decentralized outside of a bureaucratic system. I don't think any of those things beget a bureaucracy. I think that you can have an extremely industrialized society under a directly democratic system.
How can you have a technocracy without a bureaucracy? I mean, how could you get an engineer certified?
Technological proficiency and being really educated in a certain field does not necessarily mean the same thing as technocracy, to me,
No,
at
but it should
least.
be led by those people. You need institutions led by engineers to verify and certify new engineers, and you would need to have them to have the ability to arrest people who act without their permission. Otherwise, how could you have engineering as a field?
Well, you don't need it to be centralized. Those people can still do the things that they do in a decentralized system. They don't need to be leaders necessarily. There can be information, like the information and information abroad can be shared by other people and it can be distributed to other people. And this information that is correct and objective can be shared by other people in the field in a decentralized
And
system
who
that doesn't.
certifies?
Who certifies? The engineers of whatever industry there is.
But okay, what happens if there's a person who says that they're an engineer and they show up in a town and they build a building to a substandard level and it collapses? And then it turns out when there's an investigation done that they were certified by a group of their own PAL engineers who all certified each other.
Did they build this building by themselves?
Yeah, well, I mean, they supervised the construction. They did the plans.
So the people that were building the building, knowing like they built this building that, these people that build buildings for what they do for work, they built it while they probably knew it was not, it was going to collapse. Also,
Well, good luck proving that.
would this realistically happen
This happened. This literally happens. Yes, but
without a profit incentive?
well, yeah, well, yeah, people just do whatever, right? I mean, they would have directed construction crews. Maybe the construction crews had some reservations, but construction workers aren't engineers, so they're not really qualified to determine whether or not a load-bearing pillar is bearing enough load. So how would you like manage this? Because we have a good system that works right now. We just allow people to be certified as engineers, and if they're certified, they're responsible for the consequences of their construction. And if they're not certified and they lie about their certification, we shoot them in the back of the head.
Well, I am sure I still am not sold on the belief that information that is correct needs to be approved by a central committee of people with power in order for that information to be shared by everyone.
Why not
Is there a central committee today that approves what math is correct?
In terms of what math is taught? Yes, absolutely.
But what math is correct? Is there a centralized group of people that say this formula is incorrect and it is inadequate at reaching the desired solution? Is there a central committee of people that decide that right now today?
There are multiple per country, but yeah, no, there are bureaus of scientific and mathematics standards that, I mean, if you're talking about like really abstract theoretical stuff, like there can be a bit more variance because that tends to trend towards the academic, not really the practical. But the problem is like all of your equations aren't shit till somebody builds something worth $3 billion using those equations, Like no one's going to construct anything based on those calculations unless we're dealing with the certification of an organization, not just one person's say-so. And you want centralization too for stuff like medical practice, right? Like there are so many things that can go wrong with the human body. No doctor knows every solution to every problem. It's not possible. But we do have a standard medical practice where if a person is exhibiting certain symptoms, there's kind of like a playbook that doctors are encouraged to follow. And once they know what's going on, they can exercise a little bit more discretion. But that can only work with a sort of central system distributing the information. Otherwise, people are just kind of winging it,
I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I think that, especially with regards to the medical system, I think that rules and regulations can be imposed through the medical system in a decentralized manner. So that doesn't need centralization to be able to regulate how processes are carried out.
If you can't regulate it, then how do you punish people who break from those standards?
You don't let them in. You didn't let them in to begin with.
Let them in, but so if there's a group that can determine whether they get let in or not, you're talking about a central committee. If they have the ability to
the group
block
that would
people,
determine them is like everyone in that local area that happens to be part of the medical industry.
So that's just like a local committee, except regional.
Well, that committee would include all of the doctors all of the doctors in the area.
Well, I mean, you're basically talking about like a state licensing board at this point. I mean, depending on what you mean by area, but you're talking about a state board where like representatives of the.
It's a state board. Where's the imposition of violence as a method of maintaining supremacy? I don't think that there's a state involved here.
Well, you need violence.
Well, where is violence involved in barring somebody from being able to become a doctor?
Preventing a person from performing their craft in an area is definitely a kind of violence. But what happens if they lie? What happens if they go in fake certification or just flagrantly break medical practice and start doing quackery on their patients?
I think that, well, I don't necessarily disagree that violence is necessary. I'll say that. But I think that centralized violence is unnecessary. So if somebody were to go in, pretend to be a doctor, maybe even pass as a doctor and do horrible things to their patients, they wouldn't be punished. First of all, the judicial system, or not the judicial system, but the systems by which we eradicate harmful behavior would not be penal. They would be, of course, they would be. I can't believe I'm blanking on the word here. It's
Reformative?
reformative. Yes, yes. Sorry, they would be reformative systems, and they would reform these. Say a doctor was a psychopath, and he went in and he passed the medical board, and then he went and did horrible things to his patients. He would be handled in a decentralized way without the imposition of supreme state authority.
And who would decide it?
Who would decide? The people in the local area.
So what you're describing is just local law. Local police are local. They're done at a county level or a city level. So what you're talking about is like a local board, i.e., like the doctors in the area would say, like, this breaks with our recommended practice, this constitutes like malicious behavior, and then a local group would take them in for reformation, and they would probably have a badge doing it. You're reconstructing like current day society, but less efficient because you're not having a representative board. You're just sort of abstractly gesturing at all participants in a system.
I suppose that there could be room to define removing that psychopath doctor as violence, but I also think that I think it's still effective.
Well, I think our current system is effective. I think the
Our
problem
current
with our
system is
system,
exploitative and
ex-
authoritarian.
exploitation is always going to be a part of our systems, and authoritarianism can be mitigated. I think the main problem with our system right now is that it's not proletarian. It's mainly aligned towards bourgeois interests. Almost everything wrong with the way people engage with each other, conduct, it has to do with corporate interests, the imposition of bourgeois ideology on what would otherwise be, I think, a fairly functioning system. We have an efficient thing going on right now, you know? The law, international trade. I don't think we should be looking to blow it all up. You know, we're not Russian peasants. We don't live in a shit pit, right? We're not farmers in the middle of nowhere, totally isolated, self-sufficient. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. I think we should recognize that. We should make the changes we need to, but not break things we don't need to.
I think that we can fundamentally restructure the industrialized world in a very decentralized and deeply democratic way. And I think that industrialized society can continue to exist under a more anarchistic, autonomous frameworks of managing society.
Well, industrial society relies on bureaucracy. There's just no way of getting around it. The supply lines necessary to make even the simplest household objects require like multiple professionals around the world coordinating stuff in real time and billions of dollars in infrastructural investment. There's no real way to debureaucratize it. Bureaucracies exist for a reason, after all.
I think that boards of doctors can be characterized as centralized in that only doctors are able to participate in the decision making of which doctors come in and out. But I don't think that's necessarily bureaucratic, and I think that it can still be effective.
It is a bureaucracy.
I guess that's,
you have a system to allow entrance or otherwise. You've appointed doctors into a council that have the power to deny other people the right to practice their craft. Though we do get into like the regionalism thing here, because what happens if a region is just like fucking crazy and they just, all of their local doctors are corrupt or not following standard practice? You'd have to have another higher level of doctors. And this is how we reconstruct the bureaucracy, right?
I think that you can have a global, like globalized way of conducting medical workings without having it be centralized.
Well, how?
It would kind of be like popular understanding, no? Like
popular understanding. That's not how science works.
I suppose that's true. But like when with regards to just the carrying out of the medical profession. So doctors would be educated and they would have regulations imposed upon them before they can do their work.
Regulations by who?
Regulations by other doctors, of course.
Okay, but it's not just other doctors. It's a system of doctors above them. Because it's not like one doctor can just bar another doctor. Like, regulations aren't imposed interpersonally from one human to another. You're talking about forming a board of doctors above that can approve or disapprove medical licenses.
Okay. I suppose I can concede that point, but I don't think that that's a system of bureaucracy. I
Well,
think I
what
think that
happens if you get a
the way
level
that we're
above it?
conceptualizing it is very similar, but I wouldn't characterize what we're talking about as bureaucracy. So I think that bureaucracy implies something that's profoundly anti-democratic, anti-human, and antisocial.
No, that's because you're loading it with a bunch of presumptions. A bureaucracy is just a multi-tiered system. It's hierarchical internally, but that's not necessarily wrong. Even in a socialist society, if you have like a group of people performing a task, some people will be in charge of others. You can't literally just have everyone milling about with no organization. That level of bureaucracy exists in every aspect of human society. It's not anti-human. Humans made it. We made it to efficiently direct ourselves, and it works.
Humans can make anti-human things. Racism is anti-human, is it not?
I would, unfortunately, I would say tribalism is fundamentally human. I think it's anti-humanist. I think it's harmful to humans. But how it like bureaucracy? Okay, literally just like structured organization. You know, one person leads 10 people, lead 10 people each, right? That's how everything works. There's no way around that. Even the anarchist militias had commanders.
Well, anarchist militias would not exist once the decentralized liberated society had been accomplished, no?
Do you really think that anarchism is a society in which no one leads other people?
I wouldn't use the word lead, no. I think that you can have regulations that are imposed by deeply democratic committees in an anarchist society, but I would not use the word lead
How are they
because I think that
democratic?
how how are the doctors' boards democratic?
Yeah.
Once you become a doctor, you join the syndicated, or sorry, the industrialized syndicate of the doctors in that region. And the whatever decisions are made in that syndicate are made democratically with the doctors in that area.
Well, so what do you mean? So like majority vote?
Yeah, majority vote.
Okay. And would it just be like the 5 million doctors all around the world vote on everything in every area?
Well, that would really depend on what is being voted on. If it's what to do with the amount of syringes that are held in a hospital. If it is very specific to the hospital, then the people in the hospital would vote. If it's specific to the medical field abroad, then that decision would be made by all doctors across the world.
How are they going to get that done?
Through a highly federalized but deeply democratic system.
Okay, but how are they going to get the syringes there?
What do you mean?
How are they how are they going to get them there? Do they like do the vote and then they leave the office and they go and pick up some syringes and bring it to the hospital? How do they get it to the hospital?
Like exportations and importations?
They tell people to go begin an economic process to import those syringes?
Well, no, syndicates would communicate with each other.
Well,
So
a
if like
syndicate is a bureaucracy, just so you know. Syndicates aren't a flat, direct democracy.
yes, but syndicates have the capacity to be anarchic or autonomous or decentralized.
Okay, but I think that your definition of decentralized isn't the definition of decentralized that anarchists use. What you're talking about would end all life on Earth. Anarchists are about eliminating hierarchy as best as you can, but even within anarchist systems, even in like Rojava, right? They have democratic councils that are representative. I mean, people vote on their leaders. There's nothing wrong with leading. That's not anti-anarchic, you know?
Um, I I fundamentally, well, okay, it depends on what we consider leaders and what we consider leadership. Is leadership the elected representative to make the decisions on this, that, and the other? Or is leadership somebody who has good ideas and we take them and then we distribute them and we import them and we
The
incorporate them into
former
how we
because
live?
the latter would never work ever. No gigantic complex system can be sustained by a bunch of equal people and then when the person has a good idea they do it. No one would show up for that. No one would do that. That's not real. That's not a system that works. If you have a representative leader, somebody you believe in and who you voted for, and you have systems of accreditation, then yeah, I think you can get something going there, and you can build a system that's a hell of a lot more democratic than the one we exist in now. But I think the problem is, and this is probably why you disagreed with my voting take, you've idealized an economic and political system that is impossible to achieve and is so idealistic that I don't even know if it would work with the angels in heaven. And as a product of that, you can now comfortably distance yourself from any of the work that you could actually do to make the world a better place. Like, what you're describing right now cannot work. It's just not possible. The world's too complicated. It couldn't even work back hundreds of years ago. Even the distribution systems necessary to deal with agricultural development back in the medieval period required, not they did it because they were mean, required bureaucracy in order to manage. We can't just rely on humans with good ideas. I mean, how often has that worked? Like, on principle, where good things happen at a social level because everyone was just together and then someone had a good idea. How do you determine who's qualified to take care of that idea? How do you know if they're right when they said that idea? How do you know anything? You need systems of technocratic bureaucracy, people to approve and check on every level. And if people fuck up or lie, then you need them to get taken to a big building with very few windows. There's no way around this. You know, it's just a matter of improving these systems.